Okay, I think we'll slowly kick it off, and then with the initial short introduction, and then as a little warm up to Nils's presentation. So welcome everyone to the Apigee Migration Strategy, Practice, and Developer Portals webinar. Super excited about this one because it's we've got 3 companies represented here today, all bringing their knowledge to the table to help create clarity and help customers, all of you, to get a better idea of what strategy you can use when thinking about what version of Apigee you should be using, or if you can use them together, how do you migrate between different versions and those things. So as I said, we've got 3 companies here represented. First of all, we've got Nils Swart, who's a group product manager at Google Cloud. Really excited to have you here, Nils. We've had a lot of strategy conversations already, and it's great that you can share your vision and what you're seeing happening inside of the Apigee team and like the long-term strategy with our audience today. And then we also have Karthik Subramanian from Digital Disruption, who's a founder and chief architect over there, who is going to give us the nitty-gritty of like what does it actually take to do a migration. And then also I'll do a little bit of a short presentation about how all of this plays inside of the developer portal space and how that all fits into your dev portal strategy and how Pronovix can help with that. So we'll have, that was like the short introduction, the welcome. We'll start off with Nils, who's going to talk a bit about the Google Cloud's perspective. Then I'll follow up with dev portals and heterogeneous API management landscapes. And then, as I said, Karthik will talk about migration and practice. And then we'll also have some time for questions and answers at the end. Okay, and with that, I think I'll hand it over to you, Nils. So there's just at the 5 minutes mark. That's perfect for people to join up.
Thank you, Kristof. Thanks, team. Thanks for everyone for joining in. What we wanted to do today is briefly go through sort of this entire landscape of APIs, what's changing, and indeed where and when certain technology and options can be put into place. So we'll start off with something that you've heard us talk about for quite some time. We talk about this growth in number of APIs and this accelerated growth for a number of reasons, one of which is that we are seeing customers struggle with this. Whether or not your number in your organization is about 200 or not, there is this balancing point where manual tracking through a wiki or through an Excel sheet no longer works. And at that point, once you pass that point, you now have a set of different practices, different APIs, even ones that you don't know currently exist maybe in your organization, or that there are dependencies that you don't really understand. We see this growth accelerate though, and throughout the various events we've talked about machine-to-machine APIs, different agents that are interacting in different ways with APIs, the need for more control over what goes through these APIs, privacy, data protection, etc. But it's safe to say that APIs are here to stay and APIs are here to grow. And it's on that basis of seeing an ever large increase that we've adopted a strategy a couple of years ago that helps us realize that not every API is created the same, even though they all seem the same. So the title of this slide here is a reference to Animal Farm, George Orwell. All APIs are equal, except that some of them are more equal than others. And what I mean here is no more subtext than to say that all APIs seem similar from the outside, but they're there for a different purpose. And if you look at the diagram on the right-hand side, this exponential growth that we're seeing is actually a variety of things. One is the discovery of a set of APIs that you inherently had, but might not have captured in an API management program yet. There are different stages that development goes through, from trials and iterations to becoming main lines of business, and then APIs that go from main lines of business to multi-channel or global availability. As you go through these changes, the source of growth is the various business requirements, as well as the clients that are utilizing these APIs. So growth comes in many different forms, either newly generated or newly uncovered. And the importance of the reliance on this portfolio of APIs has grown as well. And you've heard us talk about how AI is only so useful as what it can do. And part of the doing is the set of services that are exposed through APIs. The expansion of requirements is another reason why you want to diverge what is applied to which APIs, going from a non-regulated product to a set of new clients and channels that require additional regulation, or simply scale your deployments means you have change to go through from an infrastructure perspective. So the big question for all of our customers has been, how do we satisfy this change without impacting consumers and developers? You don't want to go rip and replace infrastructure just to satisfy net new requirements. You don't want to have to clean up your attic or your storage facility just because there's one new thing that you need to offer later. So for us, our strategy, and as we'll talk about in a second, is to first understand what your portfolio is, then expand your capabilities around core capabilities. So you might go from on-prem to cloud, or you might add cloud to it, and then migrate where you think is necessary. Now, to go a bit more detail, if we look at that migration in particular, I'll just briefly highlight this, especially on the last 2 points, expanding your core capabilities and migrate where you need it. Obviously, you want to do that without impacting the consumer experience, which is what part of this conversation is all about today. Overarchingly, our API management strategy is roughly categorized in this diagram on the left and the 4 items on the right. We see that there is a need to apply API management both to every API that your organization has, to a varying degree of detail, and 2, to get closer to where those new APIs are generated as possible and help facilitate the creation of better APIs. So if we look at the slide from the top to bottom, we want to get into the habit of getting closer to developers and the infrastructure that they're using, the tools that they're using, as quickly as we can, as close to that as we can, which means the way that the capabilities and value of Apigee is presented takes the form of neat integrations into things like IDEs, Visual Studio Code. It finds its way into integrations into those dev workflows by integrating with Gemini Code Assist. The other side of this is that we'll be ever more present in gateways all around. Those that are natively on GCP, so we're GCP first, but certainly not GCP only, as well as gateways that might not even run on GCP to begin with. That spreading of where you can apply Apigee doesn't mean everyone conforms to one single set of capabilities. There's differing needs and different requirements that can be satisfied using different parts of gateways. In order to keep a good handle on those APIs, we believe that it's beneficial for customers to understand the full API landscape and the complexity of that landscape. You may have heard us talk about a concept of an API supply chain. That is, for any given API, managed by Apigee or not, we'd like to understand its presence, where it is, find it, and understand the interrelationships, and dress it up with as much metadata as we can. And centralizing all your APIs into a universal hub helps your platform team understand where APIs are, regardless of the stage in their lifecycle they are, and regardless of what the menu is that they've chosen for the requirements for this particular API. Then Apigee wouldn't be part of GCP if we didn't talk about the benefits of running at any scale and against any attack. Clearly, not every API will get all the protection because not every API is exposed, but the ability to scale up from very little exposure to maximum exposure with protection is what we believe should be possible. You should be able to dial that up and down. And then lastly, API management shouldn't just be for one use case or one business model. It should be readily available for all of them, including the novel ones that are AI enabled. And then the output of what the platform generates should be readily available in the tools that the rest of the groups use. In other words, API management becomes much more integral part of your overall business. What you've seen us do in the past is meet that desire of, or recognize the desire for these different places and different capabilities with a set of deployment models that exist. So you've seen us go from fully on-premises disconnected air-gapped operations to hybrid and multi-cloud to natively in public cloud, serving all of those. On top of that, we have customers with additional compliance and sovereign controls applied where and when needed, or usage of these disconnected air-gapped environments with the right accreditation and partner operations. In other words, your teams have the choice of where to run, and the choice isn't binary. It's not either or. Many customers run multiple of these and then some other vendors to go along with it. So getting that sort of single pane of glass view for platform teams is great, but obviously more is needed. And the way we think more is needed is to look at API management more as a universal continuum of capabilities, where you start off with some basic API management, registration of these APIs, basic authentication, authorization, and recognition that it's there, through to universal API management, a subset of functions that is available across any gateway type, all the way through to what you could liberally call advanced API management, where you go as deep as possible and as deep as necessary, all the way through from advanced API security through content and data privacy, all the way through to regulations and controls necessary for either air-gapped or regulated industries. So what is safe to say that from our perspective, we see the frontier of technical capability continue to outstrip the average requirements. And what I mean by average requirement is that across those 200 APIs or 2,000 that you have, there will be some that don't necessarily meet the bar for advanced API management, but they should still be visible for teams. Your operations team should know these APIs exist, and the various tools that are helping create better APIs and find those APIs should be readily available and understood. So there's no one size fits all. We believe that flexibly applying that functionality is where the market's going and has been going for some time, and every API should have that basic functionality. So part of that is an operator should have a single pane of glass to pivot off of. That's our second tier that we talked about, the Apigee API Hub. We'll talk more about that later. The needs will change over time with these APIs. You might have started years ago in an on-premises fashion, only serving this API to internal customers, and you might have grown that up to become a business that stands on its own and serves other ecosystem partners. Along the ways, there are various ways to add functionality to that API to modernize the API delivery. And one of the ways to go about this is to either expand into a new gateway offer or to outright migrate the entire use case, depending on sort of the business needs of the organization. So there is a trade-off between operational and investment cost on one end and benefits on the other end. We believe it's not an either or. You don't have to have one or the other. You get to choose sort of in a continuum. And then lastly, depending on where you have to run from an organizational perspective, the availability of the functionality and the depth and richness of policies will be dependent on however connected these APIs may be. So if you are required to live in an air-gapped world, you're going to have certain capabilities available to you. If you are in a connected world, you may be able to leverage more of the zero-day security capabilities that come in to things like advanced API security. And obviously, there's a cost aspect to that too. So net-net, what we believe on the universal API management front is that operators should have a single pane of glass view for things that are managed by Apigee or not managed by Apigee. There should be a way for you to easily expand into newer ways of delivery of these APIs and migrate to that world if and when that becomes available. And then lastly, change for whoever consumes this should not be something that's visible to the API consumers themselves. So in other words, migrations have these sort of dual aspects of it. On the one end, you're going to live in a new world with new capabilities. On the other end, you have to carry with you a set of existing consumers of those APIs. Ideally, those consumers only see benefits and aren't forced through change. So with that, the tail end of my section here is where we see Apigee fit in your overall architecture is as that linchpin between systems that you are able to change or are leveraging for sources of truth on the bottom end here, and then ultimately the various channels that you're connecting to the outside world. Passing through API Hub, through the various API runtimes, deliver the functionality that is necessary for those APIs that they needed at that time. Dial up or down the capabilities as is needed. And then last but not least, what this shows, lots of GCP, and certainly not GCP only. It's GCP first, but not GCP only. And with that, I'll pass it over to Kristof to talk more about that challenge of making sure that consumers don't have to change, even if you change things in this delivery architecture. Over to you, Kristof.
Thank you, Nils. So yeah, I'll start a little bit with why we, and thank you very much, Nils, for your presentation. So I'll start a little bit with why are we organizing a webinar about migrations? Because Pronovix is a company that specializes in developer portals. So what we saw from working with a lot of Apigee customers was that often there'll be questions about like a multi-org setup where there's like multiple instances of Apigee that they want to connect to the same developer portal, or maybe some other interfaces that they want to be able to expose to a specific customer segment. So the same way as Nils was explaining that you want to have a single pane of glass for the operator, you also want to have a single pane of glass for a specific customer group. That might be all of your customer groups in one place, but could be also different different single panes of glass for different customer groups. But you don't want to tell people like, well, oh yeah, that API is managed in Apigee, like in this Apigee org, so you need to go to a different portal, or like now you're in another country and now you have to go to a different portal. That's not a good experience. So this is a question that we've had in the past that regularly people would come to us with, and then when we saw like some drive and we started getting questions about migrations, where customers are like, well, we're not really sure what we're going to do, but we're planning to do a migration to Apigee X or Apigee Hybrid because we want to take advantage of some of these capabilities that Nils was talking about. But we're not really sure how that's going to go because, yeah, there's maybe some APIs that we don't want to migrate, or there's one group or one team that's maybe some legacy stuff. Like, how do you do that? And this is why we are organizing this and bringing all these people together. And also, we have a specific answer for this with a product that we've been working on. Because the way that we've recently started working on, so we used to be in a model where you used to connect a single portal to single Apigee instance. That was the original way that we used to do deployments. For a while now, this has been evolving. Like we've been adding we had that initial connection to, like for example, to Sandbox org or something like that, with some additional authorization flows on top of it that we sometimes had. And that has evolved into a very specific architecture that we've now committed to, that enables us to connect to multiple orgs or to even other authorization systems. Like if you have an authorization process where you have to send an email to someone to get an approval going or something like that, or you want to like do an API call to a system like ServiceNow or something like that, all of those things become possible in the architecture that we're now working on, and that we have, and that we are adding additional capabilities to in Zero Gravity. So what it does is that it's an open federated architecture. This is in contrast with the portal as part of the API management solution. So like a single portal inside of the API management solution. That was the original version of how this worked. And then two alternatives are putting a proxy in front of everything. So where you could put one Apigee org in front of all your traffic and then manage traffic through that proxy. Or potentially where you could have a control plane that is talking to the gateway or to different gateways to execute on this. We have chosen not to take those architectures, but to take this architecture where we bring different flows that can flow in parallel. What it allows us to do is it gives us a very flexible system with which we can build different different service blueprints. That could be very simple, like a sandbox API key provisioning, where you just get that. This is like the traditional model, where you just get a key from the gateway and just present that to the customer in like full self-service, or where you can go like more complex, or maybe involve other systems that are doing the approval, like an ITSM system or certain person who's part of a process and so on. Or basic authorization on the portal for ICE approval, or maybe even set up a sort of partner onboarding system inside of the portal. All of these are possible in that model. So what we're doing is we have this multi-org and potentially even multi-gateway solution where you can refocus on the authorization piece of this exercise. So less on the operational part. I think that's where API Hub is like growing in the Apigee landscape, or in the Google landscape, but more on the, okay, so I'm this person, how do I get access to this API? Or maybe other types of interfaces. The idea is that you can create singular flow where you can help the customer to do as much self-service as possible, where they'll bring all the information that is needed to approve a request into that initial interaction, so you can save time, improve efficiency, improve the developer experience, and just reduce the amount of back and forward that's necessary to approve access to an API. Practically, it's just to make it practical, like what does that look like? It's basically you can set up a form where you collect all the data, where we can maybe query a backend to get information that helps with selecting what information gets transferred, where you can have information from the portal about the account that's logged into the portal, so that we reduce the amount of information that has to be inputted manually. Where you bring all of that together to accelerate that process. And so one side that helps to save costs because it accelerates, it reduces the back and forwards. At the same time, it also could be used to create different API products, where you could even have the same API where you have a different sign-up process for different use cases. So you can maximize the value, you can identify what value a specific API is providing to a specific type of customer or a specific type of use case, and then also maybe help with figuring out what is the value and then capturing some of that value. Because the same API, to make it concrete, if you have an API for booking, for example, for booking hotel rooms or flights or something like that, that same API, if it's being used to enable a customer journey, you might even want to give money to the organization that is using your API, because they're bringing you revenue from a customer that's actually signing up for to get a hotel or a flight or something. But if that same API that is giving information about how many people are, like what are the prices for a specific trip at the moment, or how busy a flight is, if that is being queried by a competitor or an aggregator or by an analyst, then that same API might be providing much more value, where you're not going to be getting value, or maybe even negative value, because there's a competitor who's querying the same API. You might not want to give them access, but maybe you do want to give them access. And but maybe you want to ask a lot of money for that. And there's a very simple use case, but there's much more complex use cases out there. So with this authorization system, you can address these different use cases differently. Or you could use it to ask people, like, what is the value that this represents? For example, in an internal use case, how many hours are you going to save by using this API? And things like that. There's one additional thing. So this was the multi-org. How do you bring everything together under a single pane of glass on the consumer side? There's another aspect to this migration story, is that if you are working with Apigee OPDK, that probably means that you have a Drupal portal. There's some chance that you still are running on a Drupal 7 portal. And this time for reals, because it's been postponed a few times. But for the Drupal 7's end of life is projected for January 5th. So by January 5th, to be safe, you really should be migrating to one of the newer versions. And like with our team, we can offer you a managed service that solves this upgrade and maintenance problem. So this is the last migration you ever have to do. And that's something that we can offer. So with that, I'll hand it over to Karthik, who's going to talk a little bit more about the practice. We brought Karthik in, for those that don't know yet, Digital Disruption. They're a company that's a very active partner of Apigee, that has done some of the biggest migrations from the OPDK to the newer versions of Apigee already. And Karthik can talk about some of his experiences of how that actually works in practice. And with that, Karthik, take it away.
Thanks, Kristof. Thanks, Nils. It's going to be a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. Thank you. So, quick introductions. Karthik Subramanian, founder and chief architect, Digital Disruption. We've helped. We've been an Apigee partner for almost 10 years now, and we've done over 20 migrations from OPDK Edge to hybrid and Apigee X. And during this process, we've learned a lot and collected a huge knowledge base, which has kind of helped migrate customers successfully into the Edge, from Edge to X and hybrid. And we've had some of the biggest migrations and some small, mid-sized migrations and everything in between, right? So in this session, I'm going to share some of the learnings, the process, and then we'll take some questions after that. So basically, our methodology starts. Here's the overview of the methodology, right? So we go into a customer scenario, kind of trying to understand the layout of the land. We do data collection, and then after data collection comes the analysis, after which we plan, and we have tooling that migrates. Let's call it anywhere from 80 to 95% of the whole migration process, right? And then there's always going to be edge scenarios and use cases where we kind of refactor. So part of the data collection, we have custom questionnaires. We understand the deployment models. We then identify some migration patterns. There are going to be some functions that are deprecated. And how do we transition deprecated features into the new platform? And then we have a dry run tool, which kind of gives us a very accurate insight into what the customer currently has, what would work and what would not work. And I'll show you a quick report of what that really looks like. So we would not be talking in the abstract. We would have a very clear picture of your runtime data and your runtime artifacts, right? And at this point, from the analysis, we would say what can be automated and what cannot be automated. And as we built our tooling, initially we could automate 50%. Right now we are close to 85, 90% or even higher. That's what we aspire. The more experience we have, the more automation. And at that point, during our planning phase, we work with the customer, we work with the Google team, we come up with a migration plan, we kind of cost it out, identify any blockers that we have, and then kind of build out the connectivity, because the OPDK Edge to Apigee X hybrid is a substantial architecture change. So a lot of things run in GCP. So, and then we kind of do the org environment mapping. It's not usually one-to-one of what you have in your current layout versus what is going to be the new world. Role-based access control. A lot of customers we've seen given some very fine-grained access on the prior versions of Apigee, how it maps into the new world IAM. Kind of talk through this and get customer approvals. At this point, we're ready to go and automate and execute. We create Apigee X hybrid ready proxies. We have tools to do deployment. And there are two things you're going to notice: GCP task and provisioning. So actually, we need to go and provision an org environment before and then establish network connectivity, landing zones, and that's what that comes to. And create manual configurations, overrides if it's hybrid. And then at that point, we've kind of done a dry run and kind of figured it out. And then post-migration, you identify any failures, edge cases, reconfigurations, refactoring. And so that happens around, for let's say, 5 to 10% of the use cases. And we do a rinse and repeat. So because you go from dev to production, you're going to have incremental builds, we build a knowledge base, and then you go to production, you hardened, and we've already executed a bunch of dry runs, so there's no surprises. So from a work stream perspective, a different view of the previous, but then now we get into some of the work streams: assessment, organization setup, and then runtime artifact migration, data migration, portals, and go live. So this is how I would classify the migration work streams. So as part of the assessment, we have a qualification report, we have assessment reports, how the environments are set up, what is the customer readiness, and we perform dry runs. Dry runs, I'll show you a report in just a minute. And from an org setup, there's a landing zone, workspace. We create the folder structures, IAM, what permissions are required. If you're a big company, you're going to be having different business units, having access to different parts of the system, and then networking constructs and validating the setup. Is it northbound setup? Is it southbound setup? Do we have proper flows? Whatever network rules, all these things need to be validated. At that point, we are ready to run a migration, at which we would first convert the proxies, convert the shared flows, any redesigns are required, deploy them, help with the governance and CI/CD processes, because your CI/CD, if you have it already in place, you need to configure that to move to a more recent version of hybrid or X. From a data migration, you have to move the existing assets, developers, products, apps, keys, KVMs, company apps. All those things need to be migrated over. And there's this aspect of portals where I will have, that's what Kristof does for as a specialized thing. But there are API specs, themes, users, teams, workflows that need to be moved. And finally, the go live activity is just like performing dry runs on pre-prod or non-prod environments, analyzing traffic patterns, moving the tokens, traffic routing, and then planning for a fallback. And I'll get into this. There's a lot more to this. There's HADR, which I'll get to in the next slide. So let's take a look at what a dry run really looks like. Report. Okay, so this is basically an assessment report that runs on the customer. So we request the customer to either grant us access to their org as a read-only org admin, or kind of export the artifacts. And our tooling goes against each artifact to go and say, what kind of change is it going to be? Is it going to be a breaking change or a cosmetic change? So if it's a breaking change, then I have, I don't know, close to 300 rules today. And these rules keep expanding different customers as we work with other customers. Apigee can be used in a pretty broad manner. So customers, in each of the 20 migrations, I've noticed that customers add a unique flavor to it. So my tooling gets better as we go. So the more scenarios we've seen, the more expanded it is. So it will tell you what kind of changes it is. Is it a breaking change? Everything that's indicated in red is a breaking change. So then as part of that, I will get an accurate picture of what is the effort involved and how much time it takes. So, and this helps the customers a lot, because this visibility is very important. So going back to the actual activities. So there are a lot of decision points when it comes to migration. First, we need to kind of figure out what overall strategy for migration is. Are we going to do a one-shot migration, or is it going to be incremental, partial? Are there going to be any specific data retention policies? We do some dry runs, quite a lot of them across multiple environments, so that when you go to production, you don't leave anything to chance. And we know exactly what the blockers are, or what are there going to be any potential data issues that we need to deal with? Are there going to be any runtime constraints that we need to do with? And testing is often overlooked part of it. So we need to be comparing apples to apples when you go from OPDK or Edge to ApigeeX. How do we compare the test results, ensuring that everything checks out? Comm plans, internal teams, external consumers, ensuring that there's no disruption, establishing proper communication plans. And there are scenarios where you will need to run both systems in parallel, and before you completely sunset one of the systems, that is either OPDK or Edge. Operational and governance controls. So for example, how is your CI/CD going to work? What changes are required? How does logging, monitoring, alerting things differ between your existing implementation versus the new implementation? Having HADR plans, traffic cutover, and then fall back and fall forward. So in other words, once we hit a fallback scenario, how are we going to switch back controls for the system to go into the new older system, or are we going to just fall forward and handle scenarios as we go? And those are all some very important decision points that happen in a real life migration. And this is the tool that helps us with the artifact migration, where this is part of my custom tooling. So this tool operates in two modes. One is the dry run mode, and one is the actual migrate mode. So where we take the runtime artifacts and then we have it prepared in a certain directory structure. The tool goes and reads from the directory structure. It validates the proxy shared flows from there, and then creates like either a dry run report or a migrated post-migration report after the fact. As part of the migration, you run the migration rules. We create hybrid aware or Apigee X aware, because underlying software is for the most part the same. Creates those proxy shared flows, and should need be, we help them. We have a custom tooling for CI/CD as well, where you take the proxy, convert them, run through the CI/CD process. It'll go and check it into Git, and then goes and deploys to Apigee X or hybrid. And that's part of the CI/CD process. And then we finally have reporting that provides you the percentage of success and failure. Usually, we have a pretty high success rate because we've kind of factored that in as part of our dry run reporting. And then deployment happens. So that's the runtime, that is proxy and shared flow migration aspect. And then you have the data migration aspect, where the idea is to move from an older version of Apigee to a newer version of Apigee. So we first go and export the data from Apigee Edge or OPDK, where the data actually lives in Cassandra. And then we export the data, we cleanse the data a little bit based on the data quality. And we have entities stored, like products, developers, apps, keys, KVMs, company apps. And then there's always a certain hierarchy in which you export and import, right? Because there is a data model that's being honored here. And once the export's complete, then you have to import the data into Apigee X, for which we use. So all of this tooling is built on management APIs that Apigee provides. Then we import the data, and then there's reporting and validation. And all of this is kind of mostly automated for the most part now. Initially, we were able to run 1 or 2 migrations at the same time. Now the tool is scaled so that we can handle 10, 20, 30 migrations. It's all distributed, and it's coming along pretty good. And we also account for some of the features that were deprecated. For example, company apps, or things that have transitioned into what we call as app groups and app group apps. So things like that are already accounted for as part of the tool. There are data model changes, there's data changes, there's runtime changes, which we account for the most part. So the remaining 5 or 10% that I was talking about, where we don't deal with that, is those kinds of edge cases, right? Where some features are not supported. So what we bring to the table is our differentiator tool sets, which we've developed 4 years back, 3.5, 4 years back, and we've executed a variety of migrations for a variety of customers, some small, some very large. So the tool sets work. And I have my governance and lifecycle management tool running in some very, very big customers successfully. So we have our Edge to X migration tooling, where we migrate from OPDK/Edge to the latest and most recent Apigee X and hybrid platforms. And we have tooling that help migrate customers from other APIM, Azure platform or whatever. We work based on pattern-based development. So that is our tooling and methodology on a very high level. With that, I will hand it over to Kristof, or I'll take any questions at this time, and we'll take it from there. Thank you.
So I think this is the cue for we'll turn off the recording because we know from experience that it's a little less scary to ask questions on the webinar. If the recording is off, our presentations were recorded and we can share that.